Today we're going to start chapter 4, and this is something that is frequently done on the AP exam where you have to compare two different distributions. So you can talk about how this one is different than this one, how this one is the same as this one, and what does that tell you. So this is one of those things that lets you know that this is an older textbook because it talks about TV watching, which is not so much a thing anymore. You know, you're streaming and all that kind of stuff. But I think it still would apply. So the National Television Commission tracked the number of television hours watched, including streaming services, for 15 days in July and 15 days in October for the same 160 Florida households. The histograms are shown below. With a few sentences, compare the two data sets. All right. So we want to talk about all those things. We want to talk about the shape. We want to talk about the center. We want to talk about the variability. We want to talk about all those things. So, all right, they're both unimodal. Both distributions, and we always want to put this in context, right? Don't say both graphs. Say both distributions of hours of TV watched are unimodal. What else do you notice about them that's kind of the same?
The first one's for sure symmetric. That's the same.
But is this symmetric, really?
They're kind of both right.
They're both right skewed, yeah.
Right skewed.
Yeah, it looks like they're both, I would say both are slightly right skewed. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about where the peaks are.
Okay.
Right? That helps us with the shape a little bit. The peak for July 1 to 15 is in the, what is that? 40 to 47 hour bin. While the peak for October 1 to 15 is in the, is it 16 to 23 hour bin. So that gives you a pretty good idea of the shape. So then what's next? What do you want to talk about next?
Variability.
All right, so we can talk about variability. Now, it would take a long time to kind of figure out
Which one is?
exactly where any of the things are, right? You know, to figure out, I can't figure out exactly in either case the standard deviation. I don't have the raw data. I could probably estimate the IQR, but that's going to be kind of a pain. So I'm going to talk about variability. I could give just a range, but I'm going to talk about they varied from this to this. So for
Could you say the standard deviation of one is greater than the other? Or
Yeah, it's a little hard to tell on this one. I would guess that the standard deviation on the first one is greater.
Because of the outliers.
Yeah,
But
because of that tail.
but it
So you could probably talk about that.
okay.
So for July 1 to 15, the number of hours watched, and again, we always want to put this in context, varied from between 0 and 7 to between 120 and 127. It's a lot of TV watching.
I know.
In 15 days, you watched 120 hours.
Oh, that's only 15
That's
days.
insane.
Oh yeah, wow.
What is that an average per day?
It's over 10 hours a day.
What do you do all day?
Well,
Oh,
I know some people who, when you're at their house, the TV is on all the time. They use the TV as a babysitter.
Yeah. It's kind of just background noise.
Yeah,
10 hours a day?
yeah.
It's almost as bad as 200 megabytes.
While for October 1 to 15, the number of hours watched ranged or varied is a better way to say that. From between 0 and 7 and 72 and 79. So that's a way to talk about variability in this, rather than to talk about absolute spread. Okay? All right. So we've talked about, let's see. By giving where the peaks are, we've actually talked about the centers, at least a little bit. Okay? That's not going to be exactly where the median is or where the mean is, but that's a way of talking about the center. Okay? What else should we say about this? Any unusual features of either of them?
In July, there's like that 120 to 127 just by itself.
Right. So there's a gap and a possible outlier. So for July 1 to 15, there is a gap between 112 and 119 hours, and a possible outlier between 120 and 127 hours. Always talking about the context.
So this one would be hard to determine which mean would be greater, right? Because
Yeah, it'd be real hard to determine which
unless
mean
you
would
have
be
the raw
greater.
data. 'Cause
Yeah,
for the one on the left, you have that outlier, which is going to pull it. But for the one on the right, you have the peak that's really tall, so that's going to pull it more towards the floor.
well, but the thing is the peak is
Oh,
over
all the
here.
bins are-
This probably has a greater mean.
Oh, yeah, they're not. Okay. And it has an outlier. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay? So you want to talk about all those things. By the way, the other thing that sometimes makes AP statistics difficult is they'll ask you to sort of infer from what you know. All right, well, what's a possible reason for this? And this is why some of my students, and it's through no fault of their own, but some of my international students in the past have had difficulty because they weren't raised here, and so they're not thinking this way. What do you think might be a cause for the differences in these?
Summer?
What do you mean by summer? Be way more
Like,
specific.
Kids are gonna be watching more TV during July because they don't have school during the day.
Exactly. Okay, it's tough to get 10 hours of watching in a day if you're in school.
Yeah.
Okay? Although these people in this range, that's about 5 hours a day. That's you come home from school, you turn on the TV, and you turn it off when you go to bed.
It's a headache.
Yeah, that is a headache waiting to happen.
It's unhealthy.
Pardon?
It's unhealthy.
It
Yeah.
is
So
fat.
having box plots makes comparison of the center via median and spread via IQR is easier, but it may not show the shape quite as well. So here, a particular golfer has kept records of all of his rounds for the last several months at his favorite course. The first hole is a par 3 on which he sometimes uses a wedge and sometimes uses an 8-iron on his first shot. The data is pictured in the box plots at right. Write a few sentences comparing the distributions. Okie dokie. And then under what conditions would you advise the golfer to use a wedge? When would you advise him to use an 8-iron? We'll get to that in a little bit. This, by the way, is right out of the pre-algebra book. It's not quite this involved, but the numbers are straight out of it. All right, so let's talk about this. So shape, it's really hard to see if something is unimodal or not on this, right? What is easy to see is that if this is the middle and you've got all this data over here, so it's skewed to the right. So the distribution of, and what are we measuring in this? Distance to the hole. For the wedge is skewed right. While for the 8-iron, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like it's skewed left with a couple of outliers on the right.
So what would that make it?
I would say it appears skewed left with a couple of outliers on the right. That's absolutely what I would say. So that's nice because we're also talking about unusual features of the graph, which is something that we want to do. The nice thing about this is it's really easy to talk about the center. So the median distance from the hole is about, let's see, I'm going to say about 11 for the 8-iron. And it's 11 yards for the 8-iron. And about, well, I'll say it's about 4 yards for the wedge. And then we can also talk about the IQR. So this is about 2, and this is about, this looks like it's 15. The IQR for the wedge is about 13 yards.
Yes, sir.
And for the 8-iron, is about, well, it doesn't look very wide at all. So that's about 9. That's about 12. So is it about 3 yards? And then you can talk about, all right, so which one would you advise them to use? Well, it depends, doesn't it? Other than a couple of bad shots with the 8-iron, he's more consistent with the 8-iron, isn't he?
Yes.
But if you want a really good shot, you should probably use the wedge. If you desperately need, you're behind and you need to get you need to catch up with someone, probably want to use the wedge. Because you have a better chance of getting close to the hole with that than you do with the 8-iron. If you want to play it safe, probably should use the 8-iron. You're less likely to have a shot that's way, way away. Okay? All right. Let's stop there on the notes today. We'll pick this up on Monday when we talk about moose burgers and McTofu.